plunge, he seizes her neck in his fang-like teeth. A gush of blood and a hideous sucking noise follows. The girl has swooned, and the vampire is at his hideous repast.
See, these things are great. I can't wait for the next part. I owe you a penny, actually, Sean. I particularly like when... Oh, hello. You caught us all listening to Sean reading the end of chapter 1 of one of my favourite Penny Dreadfuls, which is the subject we'll be discussing this week.
The Penny Dreadfuls were a set of sensationalist, serialised stories of no great import. They were primarily written to excite and entertain the lower classes of society. Fundamentally, they had very little wit and even less virtue. Not the kind of thing that a proper gentleman would be listening to.
Are you quite finished? You literally just asked Sean to read this to you.
You did. Paid in advance too.
So no more out of you until I've done the introduction. Right. The Penny Dreadfuls were serialised stories written to entertain the increasingly educated and literate masses. Named somewhat derisively for their pricing, and because these were not well thought of by established literary types, they sprung up as mass printing became cheaper and the potential audience grew wider. They were sensational, often heavily illustrated, and quickly became massively popular, defining characters and tropes we still recognise today, such as Sweeney Todd, true crime stories, and vampires sucking blood through their teeth.
Why a gentleman of proper education like Mr. Sweetman would pay for it is beyond me.
Well, I just really like your voice.
Gentlemen, please, this is just the introduction. Can we get into all of that shortly? But first, a belated welcome to Toffs and Toolers, your weekly podcast delving into the cruel, the unusual, the mad, the sad, and the fads of Victorian England. I'm Alexander Hudson, a big fan of the Penny Dreadfuls. With me to talk it over further, I have Sean Gibson, our random northerner, who we all agree has a lovely reading voice.
It's one of my many talents.
And Alex Sweetman, representing the Toffs, who I'd rather stay quiet.
Am I supposed to say hello after that?
And joining us later, Mr. Hugh, with another of his own exciting recitations of the more quirky aspects of the Victorian great and good and their inevitable association with Charles Dickens. And away from the microphones, we have our excellent producers, Bella and Rob, and our resident scribe, Duncan, who we'd probably get more out of if he was paid by the line like the authors of Penny Dreadfuls were. I'm pretty sure he wrote that line himself. Anyway, vampires, barbers, and a spring-heeled jack. Oh my. All this and more on today's Toffs and Toolers.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we are primarily talking about Penny Dreadfuls, as you may have taken from the intro, the kind of thing where you would pay someone, potentially, to read it out if you were illiterate yourself. Now, these are the precursors for pretty much every bit of serialised content that we have today, whether it's telenovelas, soap operas, the Mission Impossible film series, loads and loads and loads of the tropes that we have built on for media, such as cliffhangers at the end, that gripping suspense, all of those come from the Victorian times.
But they did have a very different take on what they found, you know,
Compelling,
yeah. I mean, it seemed to come down to a little bit scandal and a lot of violence. That seemed to be like the thing.
And monsters.
Well, yeah, there was definitely that. I mean, it was interesting in that when you actually see those parallels, everything you just said about, you know, the franchise environment and, you know, the sensationalist thing and all the rest of it definitely did apply to how these things were actually set up. Also, in the actual infrastructure as well, it arguably gave rise to mass media in a way that the papers were obviously there selling the news and all the rest of it. But in terms of like fiction and entertainment, the guys that actually developed the Penny Dreadfuls were the ones that instrumental in setting up the infrastructure for mass production of these things. And they ran until they ran out of readers.
This was the first time that mass production like that was accessible to the common man, because printing and writing was a rich man's game. There was a tax on paper, there was a tax on ink, there was a tax on printing. The only way to get around that was to set up everything yourself from scratch.
And that's why the genius of people like Edward Lloyd came in. Now, he wasn't doing it for the benefit of the common man.
Oh, no.
But he recognised there was a huge untapped market there. And if he brought down the price of these publications to a penny, and he gave them content which they could enjoy, which was the serialized stories,
Which they could get addicted to.
very much so, as we'll sort of discuss, then maybe he could actually make a profit out of this. And he was absolutely right. That's exactly what happened. He created this whole monster, if you like, of serialized stories, which would run week on week on week. And Lloyd's Weekly became massively popular off the back of it, to the tune of something like 100,000 readers or 100,000 circulation by the 1850s.
So actually, the serialization wasn't a new thing with the Penny Dreadfuls. Like a lot of authors' works were serialized. So, like Dickens, for example,
Yes.
he would have a weekly or a monthly release of 6 to 12 pages, but that would cost like £1 each
Yes.
month, and then the whole book would be like 20 shillings, like a pound.
Yeah,
in those days.
a
It's like
really
full
good
day.
example is Oliver Twist. So Richard Bentley bought the rights to publish it, and it was released in a 3-book section for 25 shillings, which is way beyond the level of pricing that your common man could afford. The price point of a single penny, a worker could justify that.
It's like a loaf of bread,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if you couldn't read, you got one of your friends to read. And the Penny Dreadfuls were, or Penny Bloods as they were sometimes called, because there was like blood and thunder and all this kind of thing. Blood and guts.
More blood.
Yes.
Violence.
And they were sort of considered to be, this kind of scandalous, not good for the, get the blood up of the working class, which is obviously going to lead to some sort of, impure thoughts or encourage sort of revolutionary behavior somehow, when what they were talking about was urban myths and vampires and fairly scantily clad ladies.
Well, if there's petty crime in the area, you can bet it's going to be because they've been reading those Penny Dreadfuls. It was a derogatory term brought in.
They did make an issue out of some of the wild boys which they arrested actually having copies of the Penny Dreadfuls available to them. But they're undoubtedly important, and they gave us some, like I said, they gave us some of the strongest tropes imaginable. They kind of set the tone for these kinds of things which are meant to sort of draw us in and excite us. And it started out, Lloyd recognised the power of the urban myth, and that's we started with Spring Hill Jack.
Victorian Batman,
Yeah.
one of my favourites.
But he wasn't there yet, and we'll talk about his transformation into a kind of hero later on. But Spring Hill Jack was an urban myth, and he was seen originally as a kind of monster, leaping around London. And where this character came from, I don't know, but he was like leaping around the smog, attacking people with these luminous eyes.
And he was part of the aristocracy as well, in both incarnations. So he was something a little bit foreign for your common worker. You already feared the upper classes because if they didn't like you, then you could get in real trouble for it.
Yeah, but you had a monster, basically. You had this weird urban myth character. And Spring Hill Jack kept cropping up throughout the century in various different guises. And we'll talk about what happened to him at the end of the century with a new writer and how he became reformed to a certain extent.
Redemption arc.
Yeah, but he was definitely, or retconned really, but he was definitely a villain in the early part of the century. And that gave way, and the idea of a supernatural figure was, understandably, very Victorian in lots of ways, but they sort of leaned into the true crime quite heavily as well.
Ah, yes.
Stories of Dick Turpin and Black Bess. So Dick Turpin was a highwayman from the 18th century, and he was regarded as a gentleman robber.
Yes.
He held you up, but with a degree of panache and flair.
There's something a little bit romantic about being robbed by someone that dashing.
Yes, yeah, not the ladies going, oh no, please don't rob me.
Is it true that the women would actually brag about being held up by him?
This is like an 18th century. Whether the degree to which it was a myth, I don't know. But yeah, there was a sense that there was a bit of titillation there. That
You might know someone that saw it happen, kind of thing.
Yeah. So you had those kinds of stories, which were hugely, wildly successful. And then you had the kind of adventures of a number of other characters, including Sweeney Todd.
Ah, the wonderful lean into horror.
Yeah. So this was, at the time, it was written in a way which made a lot of people believe it was a real character. It was based on a true story. It's completely fictional,
Yeah.
but it leaned into this idea that, perhaps quite believably, that there was this barber out there who was cutting the throats of his victims, and there was a mechanical chair deposited them into this crypt where they'd be turned into meat pies and sold to unwary customers.
Not the first time and not the last time that people are going to be fooled by fiction, but with enough things in there that they could draw to and relate to, it was definitely up there with, now I'm worried it might happen.
Yes.
Not quite as bad as War of the Worlds, which was a
Oh,
radio show later where
the
people
Orson
actually-
Welles.
Yeah, people got committed suicide because they
It was
thought
like-
it was
yeah,
so...
it's so convincing, no warning. But this was the thing. I mean, I have to confess, when I first read up about Sweeney Todd, and, you know, this was before the film, but after Sondheim had done his production, I thought it was based on a real character. And it's only after you start looking at it, you realise, no, this is just a ridiculous fiction. But when you look at the reality of the time, you understand how people might have thought that this was a real character. When people went missing in the fogs of London, you know, never to return, you wonder what's happened to them. Are they in a meat pie? A meat pie became a colloquial term for murder. You know, you're going to end up in a meat pie. But Sweeney Todd obviously was fictional, but very believable. Sondheim did his musical, but this character was so popular at the time, they did a music hall version in the same period.
They did a music hall musical.
Yeah, so Sweeney Todd, and people went to see because they wanted to see they had a mechanical chair.
Oh, the revolving chair.
Yeah, which would deposit. So people used to go and see that and the blood and all the rest of it because they wanted gore. And these kinds of theatres were called blood tubs because you could go there and expect 40 murders a night. You know, they put on these little shows. And
Was there actual like liquid used? Was it like when you go to Panto and the front 2 rows get covered in water?
Probably not. No, I mean they had to clean up, and turnover was quite a big deal for these.
I don't
places.
mean with like real blood.
Well, no, that would be and smelly. I wouldn't have put it past them, but no, I think it was like props and so forth. But obviously, the spectacle of that and the trapdoor and the crypt, I think it's St. Crispin's, wasn't it? And, you know, the bodies that were getting turned into meat pies, the gruesome nature of it. It was wildly successful, but it definitely played into this idea of you know, true crime and murder and serial killing as a plot point.
And it embraced the modern Victorian society because this was the height of the Industrial Revolution. So the revolving chair bringing that like mechanical efficiency to something like murder.
Yeah, it was very sort of clinical and, you know, industrialized Victorian Britain. Obviously, it seemed to catch a note at that time. Anyway, Sweeney Todd was hugely popular.
Yeah.
One of the longest running series was...
the original vampire himself, Varney.
Debatable.
Well.
But he certainly had a number of... Varney the Vampire.
The biggest influence on vampire society.
Yes. So Varney the Vampire was Penny Dreadful, which ran for about 3 years in the 1840s, 3 years. It racked up, depending on which source you read, I do have the entire copy. I haven't measured the number of words myself, but it's somewhere in the region of 600 to 800,000 words.
Which is just insane.
So for context, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is about 480,000 words.
Yeah.
And it centres around this character, Sir Francis Varney, although he goes by various different names.
Oh, yes.
Apparently he lived in the Civil War and he upset Oliver Cromwell, but he was known as Mortimer at that particular point. And apparently he was chased out of a town during Henry IV's reign, I think it was. So he could be hundreds of years old. He may not be. So he's a bit like the Joker. His backstory keeps changing. Well, Heath Ledger's Joker. You know, he's not really straight on the details. He also claims he was a Bannerworth, which is unusual because the Bannerworth was the family he originally preyed on in the books. So the story opens in the most classic way. There's a storm outside. The sash windows are open. There's muslin curtains blowing in the wind. And all of a sudden there's this strange, mysterious, evil figure with glowing eyes at the window.
Floating on through.
Yeah, well, seemingly sort of coming in through the window, mesmerising all who it comes into contact with. And of course, who does he espy but young Flora Bannerworth, a lady of...
So delectable.
Yes, exactly. Wearing her night attire, but lounging upon her beds in a very sort of salacious kind of way. 1 foot on the floor.
Exposed.
Yes, 1 foot on the floor. So this is what they were leaning into. And there's obviously an appeal to young men at
it's
that time.
quite intimate.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you read, I have actually read the first chapter, and it's pretty much that. But this is the classic vampire image. This is what came into everybody's minds through the century. And you saw it replicated in black and white movies, silent movies, and even into modern cinema.
A lot of the traditional vampire tropes that we know and love today were built by these penny dreadful stories of Varney. The 2 fang marks on the neck, the floating in, the not being allowed in without asking permission. It's all got roots in there.
Yeah, although I suspect that Varney considers Dracula a bit of a latecomer because Varney wasn't subjected to weakness through garlic or the sign of the cross. He could go out in day. He just went a bit pale.
So a bit more like Blade.
Yes,
except without the paleness.
All the blades.
Yeah,
there was much fewer blades. He was also the original emo goth vampire.
Oh,
he's very remorseful about his state of. He constantly goes on about how terrible everything is.
He's cursed. It's a tragedy that he has to bear. You can't have anything but sympathy for the man.
And right at the end, he decides he's had enough. He leaves a note for a priest and throws himself in a volcano, Vesuvius in this particular case. Again, very dramatic.
Yeah.
So his backstory changes, and 600,000 odd words, 800,000 words. The story keeps changing, and the reason for this is it's probably written by multiple different people.
And they were paid by the word or by the line. So the incentive was to write more, not to write good quality, but quantity.
And it's difficult to actually... And on top of that, Lloyd made sure that it was basically a writing mill. So Lloyd made sure that his authors weren't credited. But that wasn't necessarily uncommon at the time. Authors didn't, unless you were Dickens, you didn't really get a credit as an author. It was like by the same author of whatever book you made previously. This is kind of, and Dickens was the first real big celebrity author who could command his own price.
Yeah.
So these jobbing writers used to compete against themselves, because obviously if you had a storyline which was good, you'd have more business and say, okay, that one's... What this led to was like, let's just say a few canonical slips in the storyline.
So lots of different writers would take the story.
Yeah.
You forget what happens last week.
Sometimes the chapters are misnumbered, and the Bannerworths disappear at one particular point. They just no longer exist. And somebody backfills later to say, well, they met an unfortunate demise. So they passed away, but it's not really clear how they died.
They died off camera.
Yeah. So, and this was like these long-running stories. Now, it's probably... We'll talk about the authors in part 3, because they are interesting characters. They're right, how he came to know that they might have written these books. But there were a number of people who were like powerhouses behind it, and they must have made a reasonable living in order to actually do this. But certainly it's the case that these huge, Lloyd's Weekly especially, became this massive powerhouse of publishing. So Lloyd didn't just control the writing, he controlled the publishing, he controlled the mills which made the paper,
and he
and the distribution.
He grew the grass, which he shipped to the mills in order to make the paper.
Yeah, the paper was really bad quality, wasn't it? That's
It
why
wasn't.
not
It was
many
cheap.
survived
Yeah.
now.
They were called read to pieces because literally the paper would fall apart after you'd read it a number of times, and these were passed around between people.
Yeah.
You'd get like a group of boys pooling their pennies so that they could buy a couple of weeks' installments, and by the time it was done going around the group, there was nothing left.
So that is the groundwork for this amazing sort of episode of this period of history where, these people consume stuff like we consume the Marvel universe.
So much colourful creativity from just a few minds, really.
Well, we'll certainly get into, in part 3, we'll talk a little bit about the writers. We'll also talk about the change between Lloyd's vision and what happened in the 1890s.
Ah, yes.
When it started to get a little bit more sort of...
Everyone likes a moral panic.
Exactly. And we'll also have a bit more about Varney and Spring Hill Jack in the mix. But for now, we'll sort of take a quick break. We'll go and discuss with our sponsors what they'd like to sell you out there at the moment. Delighted to see that. When we come back, we'll be talking about what the Dickens and whatever filthy lucre you've been trying to scrape up this week.
Literally scrape up, I think, from the
It usually
smell.
is scrape up stuff,
Possibly.
isn't it?
Yeah, that is going to be the running theme here. It's Sorry, mate. You need another bath. Join us after the break.
Are you a Whig in a pinch that can't smoke in the chamber? Are you in a non-smoking carriage at all? Are you feeling the cravings whilst on best behavings at the de Havilland's ball? We have cures for all these ailments. What you need is some lovely snuff. We sell it in droves in mint and cloves, but one packet is never enough. We do a good line too in snuff boxes. We've encasements in silver or horn. Whate'er the occasion or fashion persuasion, you'll appear suitably high-born. Visit Lovely Snuff for a pinch of the good stuff today. Savile Row, London.
And welcome back. We have in the studio with us, returning once again for another innovating Mr. What the Dickens, is Mr. Hugh. And of course, we'll be finding out what filthy lucre you've been pursuing this week, Sean. I'm sure it may or may not involve poop, but we'll find out. We'll find out. I'll wait to find out whether or not something disgusting is actually involved in that. But I'm dying to actually hear from you, Mr. Hugh. Who have you got for us this week in What the Dickens?
Well, the streets of London are smelling fragrant today, and
Yes.
I know you know who we have to thank for that. Today we're going to talk about the man who did what no novelist, no politician, or no preacher could do. He made London stop smelling like a literal open grave. I'm talking about Joseph Bazalgette. He wasn't an artist or a poet, he was a civil engineer, perhaps the most civil of engineers. He had a brain like a calculator and a stomach made of iron. And his connection to Charles Dickens, it was arguably the most visceral relationship in the history of London. Because whilst Dickens was writing about the soul of the city, Bazalgette was busy fixing its bowels. To understand Bazalgette, you have to understand the summer of 1858. It was known as the Great Stink. London had become the most populous city on earth, but it was still using a sewer system designed for the Middle Ages. Every toilet in the city emptied directly into the River Thames. That summer, a massive heatwave hit, and the Thames stopped being a river and became a thick, fermenting soup of human waste. The smell was so powerful that it actually stopped the British government. In the Houses of Commons, they soaked the curtains with chloride of lime to try and block out the stench. But the MPs still fled the building, clutching handkerchiefs to their faces. Charles Dickens was living through this. He was a man who liked to walk for 15 or 20 miles a day. But in 1858, his walks became a nightmare. He wrote scathing articles about the pestilence and the vile river. In letters, Dickens described the Thames as the deadly sewer, and his novel, Little Dorrit, he painted pictures of a city where the very air was a poisonous infection. To Dickens, the stink wasn't just a smell, it was the moral failure of the British Empire. Enter Joseph Bazalgette. Bazalgette was the ultimate awkward Victorian professional. He was obsessively meticulous. Whilst everyone else was panicking, Bazalgette was drawing up 318 miles of brick-lined tunnels. He didn't want to move the waste off the streets, he wanted to move it on forever. His weird obsession? Diameters. Bazalgette was mocked for making his pipes much, much larger than anybody thought necessary. But he had calculated the future population of London, then he doubled it. He used to say that a city's greatness was measured by the size of its sewers. The awkward reality of Bazalgette's work was that he spent his life in the dark, underground, knee-deep in, well, you know what. He was the invisible saviour. Whilst Dickens was being cheered in the theatres, Bazalgette was overseeing the laying of his 318 million brick-lined tunnels. The Resolution was a masterpiece of Victorian can-do energy. Bazalgette built a series of massive interconnecting, intercepting sewers and pumping stations, palaces of steam and iron, like the Crossness pumping station, which are so beautiful that they are often called cathedrals of sewage. Dickens eventually saw the results. The cholera outbreaks that had been haunting his childhood and his novels suddenly stopped. The great stink vanished, and Bazalgette had effectively replumbed the world Dickens wrote about. There is a final poetic connection here. Bazalgette built the Victorian embankment. And if you go to London today and walk along the river where Dickens used to pace at night, you are literally walking on top of Bazalgette's pipes. Dickens gave London its voice, Bazalgette gave it its health. One man described the darkness, and the other man cleaned it out. It's the ultimate Victorian partnership, the dreamer and the ditch digger.
That's remarkable. Is often talk about Victorian engineering. We have to mention Bazalgette's sewers were built so well, they survived into the 20th century. We're only just starting to think about redesigning that sewer system now. His contribution to the health of the city is immeasurable. There's nothing anybody really wants to talk about because basically you're talking about poop being washed out into the sea. So thank you very much for shedding some light on perhaps a gentleman who's not talked about as much as he
My
should
pleasure.
be. So, speaking of poop,
It's absolutely terrible.
what's wrong, Alex?
Not Bazalgette's work. Bazalgette's work is absolutely amazing. How can I put this for polite society?
Well, luckily you're with us, so
Bodies are missing. So there's been a series of trials recently where bodies have been stolen, and before they've been buried, people have been having funerals, and there's been caskets of gravel, dirt, feces, anything else except the actual people buried. I've got a quote here from one of the recent trials. I stood by the grave and heard the dirt fall upon the wood. I thought I was burying my father, to find now that I was weeping over a box of gravel while his limbs were being carved by students, medical students. It's a thought that no
That's
man
kind of
can
stupid.
bear.
that's
It's
Somebody's stealing-
abhorrent. It's abhorrent. Society is falling apart.
Sean, you're looking a bit. You don't happen to know anything about this, do you?
Not on purpose.
Not on purpose.
Oh, I fear that may have been my fault.
What? Stealing bodies?
Well, like I say, not on,
Sean.
well, okay. So I was in the tavern
Oh,
last
dear.
week, and I was looking for work, and I was asking my usual contacts if they've got anything going that can give me some coin to keep me going. And yeah, one of them said he had some delivery work. So I thought, delivery work, that's quite easy. Bit of a strange location to be delivering to. We delivered some sacks of stones to the workhouse. It's not too uncommon, since they do break stones as part of their job. And then we took some linen wrapped things to the surgeries.
Bodies? by any
Well,
chance?
not that I saw.
Did you
but-
just not see because they were wrapped in linen? Were they shaped like bodies?
They were a bit meaty, yeah. But well, since then, I've been feeling a bit guilty. I definitely think that they were swapping out the bodies for rocks in this case. So I did a bit of reading. Might surprise you to learn that I can read. Yeah.
Well, good for you.
So I did a bit of reading, and you must have heard of the Anatomy Act.
Yes. It's the one
1832.
that stopped the resurrectionists
That's right.
from
Yeah.
stealing bodies for
people like
anatomical
Burke and
research.
Hare who were
Yes.
just murdering people and taking their bodies to doctors for the medical research.
We got rid of all of that.
Got
thanks
rid
to
of
the Anatomy
all
Act.
of that. Yeah,
Well, that
It
was up in Scotland.
Supposed to
That
be
doesn't
a
happen
great
around
act.
here, does it?
Exactly. No.
It would never happen in London.
Well, it turns out that it really just changed the act, changed what happens, so that you can leave your body to science, or if you're the owner of a workhouse, leave their bodies to science when they die. And apparently it's all legal, and there's been trials. People have been acquitted for it. So yeah, it may
Well,
not
this
be.
can't be legal though. Swapping out a body for stealing bodies from loved ones.
So if the family doesn't claim the body within, what is it, 2 days, I think it is, then
That's a reasonable period of time.
yeah.
Right.
Whether the families are
so.
told that the person's died within that time, I'm not sure.
I now see where the problem is.
But this is all for medical research, right?
Supposedly, yeah.
It would be better to have someone practice on a cadaver than a live
Well,
person.
that's why the Anatomy Act came in. So I believe that was to sort of assist medical research in a way that didn't put the doctors at risk. So if there was a supply of bodies that could be acquired without having to dig up the graves, then that would have been of benefit. But it does seem like slightly
Stealing
borderline.
them just before they get to the grave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to
Or-
be working with these people anymore.
Really, they are all a bit shady, shall we say.
Yeah, some of the jobs that I've had to do in the past, not quite as bad as this, but
I'm not sure it's an upgrade from poo.
Yeah, or even mudlarking.
no.
You know, and mudlarking was dangerous enough.
I'll tell you what, though, all this talk about those new sewers, I've heard that things get washed away into those, like jewellery and things. I might give it a look.
Give it a look.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I can understand why you want out of this particular business. Some of the others held promise and they didn't follow through, but this one specifically,
This
yeah,
one's
will
just
push to one
mean.
side. But never mind. Hopefully, you can find an honest living next week that doesn't involve bodies or poop, or a combination of both. Thank you so much, Mr.
My
Hugh, for
pleasure.
coming in yet again to reveal the backstory of another What the Dickens. We look forward to finding out who your subject is going to be next week. In the meantime, though, before we get back to the meat of it, we'll be talking to one of our sponsors. You shall be entertained by an advertisement coming up very shortly, and then we'll be back to the show.
I'll be jiggered. Yet another table rapper completely unable to contact my dearly deceased aunt about that incredibly elusive inheritance document. If only there was a simple and effective way of contacting the dead.
You there?
Who? Me? Where did you come from? Are you a spirit risen from the grave?
No, I was behind this tree the whole time, but that's not important right now. Are you trying to speak to those beyond the veil?
Why, yes. It's quite the conundrum. My aunt has died, at a quite inconvenient moment, I must say, and I've simply no way of contacting her.
Then I can provide the solution. Here, take this spirit trumpet.
This looks like a relatively flat piece of metal.
It is conveniently collapsible, so your communion with the dearly departed can be commenced at a moment's notice.
Why, yes. This fully extended spirit trumpet is a marvel.
Indeed, just apply to one ear and allow the spirits to do the rest. The perfect way to reach into the beyond and comprehend the mysteries of the afterlife.
Will ghosts try to climb inside my head?
What an absurd notion! Buy the Acme Echo Ectoplasmic Luminary Spirit Trumpet today. Allow the dead to whisper the secrets of the beyond directly into your mind. So, there you are. Come closer. We have much to tell. It's time for part 3 of Penny Dreadfuls. We do want to sort of talk to the whole thing to do with the writers themselves, because
Yeah.
they were semi-anonymous.
Given they didn't really have any credits to their name, and as you said before, like you would have people say, read this new story from the author of such and such, but it wasn't ever named.
No, and when you've got these long stories of hundreds of thousands of words,
Running for literal years.
yeah, switching,
So the longest running one was actually 12 years. It was called Mysteries of London.
that's a lot of mysteries.
And it was weekly as well. So it was like 650 episodes of it or something like that.
Midsummer Murders of its time.
That's incredible. It just shows that
4.5 million words.
I can't even imagine it. Trying to put that together as like, here's the compendium version. So here's my Mysteries of London shelf.
It's a few pennies for sure.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, the number of authors they must have had to actually sort of get through to actually write all of those different stories. And obviously we talked about Varney before.
Yes.
So one of the principal suspects in that who wrote it was a guy called Rymer, Rymer. He is believed to be the original author of Varney. He was much more sort of verbose about some of the more sort of literary aspects of the story.
If you're getting paid by the line, then you flesh out the paragraphs.
You do.
You describe the color of the drapes and how they flow against the wind.
Exactly. So you get these sort of very sort of long, sort of drawn out phrases, and we believe that he's associated with Varney because historians found some of his notes in the 1960s, which seemed to indicate that he was involved in the original drafts. But he oversaw quite a lot of the other writers that would have been involved. And the other key writer of Varney was probably a guy called Thomas Prest.
Ah.
So Prest and Rymer basically bounced off each other, but those two couldn't have written every single word of that particular.
Not likely. It's a lot to try and get done, even with two people.
Because allegedly Rymer was working across about 10 different titles at the same time.
As you mentioned before, we had Sweeney Todd going at the same time, and my
Spring Hill Jack.
Spring Hill Jack, of course, the other big one.
So Spring Hill Jack obviously appeared in Lloyd's Weekly to begin with, but there was another writer who went under the pseudonym Charlton Lee, a guy called Alfred Burridge, in the 1880s, and it's time for your favourite bit, because we're going to talk about the reinvention of Spring Hill Jack. So
Think about it. An aristocratic man who uses his wealth to create Victorian inventions in order to help fight crime and save people, with literal springs in his shoes so that he could leap over tall buildings. It was Victorian Batman.
he could also breathe fire.
He could breathe blue fire. He had this like little clip that allowed him to put forth like gusts of flame. And people claimed that they had seen this. There were actual people who had said, "Yes, I ran into Spring Hill Jack, and he breathed blue fire at me."
I know. Aldershot, the military camp at Aldershot, actually put people on alert because they thought they'd seen Spring Hill Jack. So they sent out soldiers with guns to actually try and protect themselves again. They think it may have been a prank by one of the officers, but
even so, it's the point where fiction crosses over into urban legend, crosses into fact. The fact that there was a real world response to a story is just incredible.
Spring Hill Jack as the Victorian Batman is just phenomenal. you know, he's supposed to have had this oilskin outfit, so he actually had like the superhero costume as well.
Yeah, properly.
Disguised himself, and he fought crime.
It's almost
explicitly
anachronistic.
fought crime. Yeah, so they didn't obviously have this concept of superheroes, but you can see the evolution of those ideas. This person who had these extra abilities or capacity to actually sort of make a difference in everybody's lives, and somehow is separated from society.
He's separated from society. He started like more of a demon figure.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the original urban myth was like a horror story, a ghostly kind of figure. But Burridge rewrote him as this kind of heroic, and it was fitting in at the time with a new publisher who interceded at the time, a guy called Harmsworth, who wanted to write stories of manly virtue.
Well, because there was such an outrage over the stories and how corrupting they were, he marketed his stuff as penny wonderfuls.
Well, there's penny delightfuls.
Sorry, penny delightfuls.
Yeah. So the penny delightfuls were quite fluffy by comparison.
These are upstanding moral stories for young boys to set good examples.
Yeah, they were specifically targeted as young boys. They were meant to encourage a more sort of positive approach to these kinds of things, but a lot of them didn't really work.
Yeah,
but
it doesn't sound like it would be as popular when society wants scandal.
Yeah.
But quite yes. But some of the ones that did survive or were successful were more to do with representing, heroes.
Yeah.
And so you had Spring Hill Jack, and then you had Jack Harkaway, who was like, he was hard to describe. He wasn't quite a spy or a detective, but original illustrations of him had him fairly normal looking. Then Sherlock Holmes became popular, and he started to look a bit more Sherlock Holmes.
Across. Yeah.
But he survived through past the Victorian era. But one of the big figures to come out of this, and I'd be very surprised if it wasn't an influence, is this character called Sexton Blake. So Sexton Blake was he was this debonair character and adventurer, but also he worked for the government, and he evolved into this sort of super spy character.
A man of renown that they could look up to and say, yeah, I could totally be a super spy. I could do this.
Yeah, he was basically fighting for the crown wherever it was needed.
Sounds like a precursor to the Bond novels.
I was going to
Fits
say,
in with the feeling of empire.
Fleming would have overlapped with Blake, and it is much later, but Blake as a character survived until the 70s in a lot of different comics that came through. So his influence, although it shifted to visual medium rather than just the written form, with comics and magazines, you can certainly see his appeal to young men. And it was like trying to get people to have this, young men, to have this sort of particular association with the heroic adventurer. And you can see that the way in which the shift from Sweeney Todd, Varney, and the early form of Spring Hill Jack became this need to promote what they called muscular Christianity.
Yeah.
Manly men doing manly things around the world for the sake of king and country, or queen and country in this case.
And Harmsworth pitched it at half a penny. So it was cheaper than the penny dreadfuls that were already out there.
Yeah, and even allowing for gradual inflation over time. Halfpenny at that time would have been, quite a bit cheaper.
Yeah.
And he did quite well out of it. Possibly not as well as Lloyd, who pretty much cornered the market for the whole of penny dreadfuls.
Yeah, milked it for as much as he could.
Yeah, and like I said, it was targeted towards working class people, and that was the amazing thing about that, is that although there were these moral panics around it, arguably it gave rise to a desire to actually read, raising the literature levels.
For something that society kind of railed against because they saw it as a corrupting influence, to have it driving literacy behind the scenes is a really positive outcome.
Yeah, I think we can all celebrate, and we need to thank Varney for giving us these tropes of what came next. Bram Stoker's Dracula obviously leaned, and there are other characters as well, almost forgotten about, like Carmilla, who is a female vampire,
yes,
also popular but doesn't appear as much, possibly because she also preyed on females. So there's a whole other undercurrent there.
A little bit naughty.
Yeah, exactly. I think Carmilla itself is an amazing character. She's worthy of a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll present something separately.
Double back.
Yeah, and there are other vampire figures, but Varney sits in that consciousness because it overlapped between what the public wanted and these modern ideas of what a vampire should be. Bram Stoker took in a slightly different direction, but you can see where all of these kinds of things overlap.
A lot of the tropes that were created for Varney did stick with vampires, but some of them moved into other forms of pop culture and other monsters without people even realizing it. The reanimation by lightning.
Oh yes, that was part of Varney's story.
It was part of Varney's stories. So commonly people believe that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein has that lightning reanimation in it. The original text doesn't. It barely even implies that there might be lightning involved.
So this is a Victorian obsession with...
It's the Victorian
lightning.
Obsession with galvanic cells and throwing it all together, which then just got adapted into different renditions.
That's really... Oh yes, that's right, because he got hung and then he was brought back to life by the power of electricity. So exactly. Those kinds of things, the bolt of lightning, giving life to people, all of those kinds of things, a lot of them can be... They must have been drifting around in ideas, rattling around in these writers' heads, and they must have got it from somewhere.
You read something when you're young, when you're later, you write and you don't realise you've been influenced.
Exactly. So I find all of the influence of the Penny Dreadful, whatever you think of them as in terms of prose, the influence... Well, they were a little bit... purple prosy in places, but they were hugely influential, massively popular. They gave rise to a massive amount of entertainment and all of the arguments around what influences young people and the desire to actually control that by the media, the government, and all the rest of it in order to corral the minds of the public in a certain direction.
I really like the idea that what started as effectively marketing for stories also then moved into legitimate journalism later on. With the authors, not all of them stayed just writing fiction stories. Some of them moved on to reporting, and the same with the actual publishing houses, because eventually the market's going to be taken over by other people. So you pivot. You've already got the setup to print text. Why not move into reporting on the news?
Well, news was part of Lloyd's empire as well, but it just probably didn't make him as much money as writing about murderers and true crime and all the rest of it. And there were so many of these.
If only there was more murder in Victorian London.
Well, you'd read about murder, that you go to one of the blood tubs to actually watch the murders, and then you might, on your way home, witness a murder.
Yeah.
Who knows? It was a crazy time. The Penny Dreadfuls are an amazing piece of history. I'm so glad we actually managed to touch upon them and talk about some of these amazing characters. We haven't done with it, I don't think.
No,
we will come
back to it.
Too much material.
I know. We will get into one of these at some point. But for now, gentlemen, we will call it a day. Thank you so much for joining us. We do hope you'll join us next week for another amazing foray into the wild, wonderful, and unusual world of Victorian London. Toffs and Toolers, a criminal Victorian adventure, was brought to you by Dreadful Penny Productions. The cast were Mr. Alexander Hudson, Alexander Sweetman Esquire, Sean Gibson, and Mr. Hugh. The scripts were inked by Mr. Duncan Allwood, with constant interjections from the cast. The producers were Bella Gregory and Rob Morris. Illustrations and scribblings were provided by Mr. George Flett. Studio facilities were provided by the fine fellows of Bison Content London. Any unsavoury details in this broadcast were automatically silenced by a spring-loaded Victorian sensor operated by Mr. Sean Gibson. If you heard a tiny silver bell whenever a fact became too scandalous, this means it was working fine, but you should probably retire to a darkened room to recover from the many indecent things you've just absorbed.